So I'm one of the delegates of the NEOMA London Club. I'm having this role for now 3-4 years. I think Cyril started way before me actually. Cyril, like something like 7 or 8 years already. No,
15, 14.
14 in London. No, you're talking about the London Club itself.
Yeah, 14, 2007.
14,
but I mean,
oh
I've been on and off, so I've been in the background, and I've let more active people like you take the lead.
Okay, thanks. So, what did we do in London Club? We tried to organize events before COVID. We tried. We were having lots of events. We were trying to have at least one event per month. Most of the events were organized with other alumni organizations in London, like HEC, EDEC, ECP, because we are trying to have a very active network here and try to build as much conference as we can, to have as much conference as we can, like on specific topics. So that needs, for organizational purposes, we need to have like many schools, many people involved in. Otherwise, so we do conferences, we do afterworks, basic afterworks, and we were trying to do also cultural events like visiting museums and having people participating in different activities, like for example quiz pubs and so on. So yeah, we're trying. The main objective of the London Club is to keep the community, the NEOMA community, together and enhance its interaction with other alumni organizations. We were trying also to have sometimes events with other foreign universities. That did not work very well because of basically the expectations are different from both sides. But yeah, if you have any question about our activity, more detailed activities, you can just ask question in the Q&R tab, I think, here. And yeah, we'll try to respond as much as possible. So I think now it's time to start the conference. Yeah, I don't know if there are going to be many people, but if many more people, but if other people are about to join, they will just catch us on the way. So I'm going to present now the topic of the tonight's event. And more specifically, I'm going to present Guillaume because Guillaume, I know him for quite some time, so it's going to be also a good opportunity for me to know exactly what he's doing, because I met Guillaume already already lots of years ago in KPMG when we were young, Guillaume.
I think it's
so
12
Guillaume,
years ago, Boris.
What?
I think it's 12 years ago, Boris.
12 years ago, yeah, so 12 years ago, exactly. And so Guillaume has basically a curriculum that is close to ours. Guillaume went to Prepa HEC, then he joined Business School HEC. He went to audit KPMG, then he joined internal audit within Sanofi. And within Sanofi, he did different jobs. Outside internal audit, he went for different projects in Czech Republic and Barcelona before coming back to Paris. And then suddenly Guillaume decided to change everything, to change his way, and to dedicate himself to climate change and the new energy production. So before maybe even starting the overall presentation that you're going to be doing, may I ask you to tell us what were your motivations on pursuing a completely different route from what you were building for over the years?
So first of all, thank you for having me here, Boris and Cyril. I'm very pleased to be able to present myself. I did not expect to have to say a few lines about myself, but let's say obviously it's a massive challenge. I do believe it's the biggest challenge mankind faces. It sounds a bit overblown when I'm saying that, but when you see the implication both of inaction and action, well, it means that now I start to gear up to because countering climate change will be quite something. And maybe I must say, from a very selfish point of view, I like hard to crack problem, and in a way, climate change is the ultimate problem. That would be it in a nutshell. That's why I wanted to dedicate myself to become an economist, and more specifically a researcher in this area. So I've just achieved extra education to perfect my knowledge in terms of energy economics, and right now I'm about to prepare a PhD within a company called Rexocode, which is basically an economics prospective institute located in France, especially keen on topics such as competitiveness, industrial performance, and recently they decided to open a climate and energy department, understanding how important it is.
Thanks, Guillaume. So now we can go to the hard topic.
Yes, I'm going to share my presentation. I think this, no, it's all right. I have full visibility on there. So obviously, climate change implies an energy transition. It's about how to get rid of fossil fuel in a very short time. And the question, what does it mean for the economy and for the industry in particular? And this is what we'll talk about right now. Obviously, I wish I could give you all the answers, but it's the topic of my thesis, which I'm only starting. So maybe in 3 years, I could come back and give you my main conclusion of exactly how to achieve everything. But in the meantime, I'm sure within the bit less, I'll try to stay within less than half an hour. Let's put in broad strokes the stage. What's happening? What are the trade-offs and the challenges for the economy and for the industry? What does it imply to phase out fossil fuels? So I like to go back to the basics. You will excuse me if you feel like I'm going back a bit too much to the basic, but I like to be everything to be aligned to what's at stake. At the start, it's all about reducing our emissions. Right now, we have put ourselves on the path towards incremental climate change. Just with what we have emitted since the industrial period, see, it's already connected to industry, we will have an increase of temperature at the surface of the globe of 1 degree with quite some consequence. What's next? It depends on our emission pathways. Either we continue as we used to do, meaning a country forego their initial climate engagement and resume full-scale development based on fossil fuels. And then by the end of the century, the world will be unrecognizable. Plus 5 degrees is approximately what we could expect in this case. Just to give you an order of idea, last time we have a 5 degrees difference versus today, it was 20,000 years ago during the Ice Age. The climate in Europe was Siberian. You could walk from Paris to London without taking a ferry because the channel was just a river, and actually you would not want to go to Britain because it was covered under a thick ice sheet. Same world, completely different place to live. Since it has been assumed that it's something we wanted to avoid, with world leaders agreeing in 2015 to stay well below 2 degrees through the Paris Agreement. What does it mean for our emission pathways? It means decreasing by 5% every year, which is something unprecedented. Sometimes we had falls into emissions was due to mostly wars, economic crises, and most recently to a nasty pandemic. It's something very new. It's 1 COVID every year in terms of emission abatement. Now, what's sitting behind those emissions? Because one thing to say we want to abate them, it's better to understand them. It's mostly about fossil fuel that we burn. And on the face of it, you could say that industry is just the very top part of this curve, cement, flaring, and so on, which would be like 5% of total CO2 emission. Obviously, the picture would be incomplete because you would need to add everything that is burnt by the industry. So basically, abating climate change is about phasing out fossil fuel. And if you look at when we started to emit a lot with fossil fuels, it actually corresponds with the moment we started to develop industry in the first place. A quick historical look will confirm that. So you see here a graph which conspicuously looks like the previous one, but it's not emissions, it's fuel consumption or energy consumption. And as you can see, once we decided to industrialize, we started to pile up forms of energy. And this is what's been quite interesting over the last 2 centuries. the energy history of mankind has always been about adding new sources of energy. To coal, we added oil and we added gas, but never we phased out a previous type of energy. And then we added a little bit, some little stuff to produce more electricity. And this is what's really new with this energy transition. It's not about adding new form of energies. It's about phasing out old ones and replacing them. And so obviously it corresponded to the industrial development. And it's something that we can see also when we look at the evolution of production versus consumption of fuel. So here I have put on the index 100 basis because the parallel evolution of production, energy consumption, and fossil fuel consumption. So obviously it's on the 100 basis, otherwise it would be comparing different units. What's obvious is that it's highly correlated. It's always both are growing at the corresponding pace, well, not exactly pace, but on a corresponding trajectory. Every time there have been a shock in energy supply, there have been a corresponding shock in production, which can allow us to see how much we need energy to carry economic production, which is quite logical because from a physical point of view, energy is about what you do to change something. What about to change the temperature of something? What about to change the shape of something, to move something from one place to another, to move an electron from one place to another through a network, etc., etc. Every transformation in the physical world requires energy, and since producing and providing services is about doing transformation, inevitably producing requires energy, and producing ever more, as we have been doing over the last 2 centuries, requires ever more energy. The only thing we can do is use energy more efficiently, which is why you can see that the production curve, GDP curve, grows faster than our energy consumption. But that's about it. We have never been able to produce more while using less energy, and in particular while using less fossil fuels. Our economic development has been about mobilizing ever more energy and preferentially getting it from fossil fuels. And what's quite interesting is when you look at national accounting or aggregate accounting, energy does not weigh that much. It's 5% of total global GDP. And it's quite logical because it just means that it's abundant. It's abundant, so it's cheap. So you can use it. We can use it a lot to produce many, many, many other things that have value too. But it should not obfuscate the fact that one way or another, you cannot have an economic activity without energy. And you cannot have a massive economic energy without massive amount of energy. And the best thing that can happen is that the energy is so abundant that from a valuation point of view, it doesn't weigh so much. So now how we have those nice fossil fuels that have triggered our economic expansion. Now economic energy transition is about getting rid of them. So we could say that it's all about getting rid of 3 products, those 3 ones. Once we get rid of those 3 products, we will have achieved energy transition and resolve a big chunk of the problem when it comes to climate change. But now, where does that put industry? Because I've talked a lot about fossil fuel, not so much about industry. Here is well, not so easy to read graph, but which summarize the whole aspect. Here you see all the emission of greenhouse gases. You can see that process related emissions from the industry represent like 5% of the worldwide totals. This we've already seen. But also industries represent a quarter of global greenhouse effects emissions, or a third of energy related greenhouse gas emissions. It's where we see how much our industrialization is connected to the consumption of fossil fuel, how much industry is reliant on it. And it's very concentrated. When you want to decarbonize industry, it's mostly about heavy industry, steel, cement, chemicals. Also, other type of industry, especially light industry and assembly industry, also have their share. And also major economies such as like in Europe, US, etc., still have their share, but a big chunk nowadays of energy, of industrial emissions take place out of major economies. So it's really a worldwide matter. Now, the first question we need is, why are we so addicted to fossil fuel? And we could say there are two main reasons for that. The first one is pertain to their physical features. Fossil fuels have a number of physical qualities that make them easy to use, attractive. The first one is that they are highly concentrated. Basically, a barrel of oil is energy in concentration, which might not be the case when you want to start to gather wind power or solar power or cut wood. So it makes it quite a very convenient form of energy. Another nice aspect is that it's easy to pilot its use. You can basically, when you have fossil fuel, you can mobilize it whenever you want, whatever the hour, whatever the time. Just think whenever you are driving, how much time elapses between when you just push a button, the acceleration pedal, and when your car takes in the time of speed. And this shows how much fossil fuels are easy to use, are able to adapt to every energy need that we have, which might not be the case, especially for wind power and solar power. Also technological advances may result it. Consequently, that they are easy to transport and to store, which is not the case with electricity production. Electricity can be easily transported, but not so easily stored. It's much more complicated. It's abundant, relatively abundant. We have been tapping into the natural stock that have been built up over the last millions of years, and we still have much of it. It's not, we don't have the same abundance with wood. We don't have the same abundance with uranium. Also, the other fuel might do the trick. And the potential for building dams is also very limited. Although there are still some room for improvement in some countries. Finally, there is quite a need to extract. Basically, it means that once you have found an oil field or a gas field, just install your machines, your installations, and you start to pump. It's quite easy. It's very concentrated, geographically speaking. You just have to dig a hole. It's much more complicated to extract the energy, let's say, from a grain of uranium, or to get a massive amount of solar energy, because then you need to then you need to tap it from everywhere the sunlight hits the earth. So all those physical features have made fossil fuels so advantageous, and I've explained why they have prevailed over time. But this is only part of the story. If we really want why so far, why we have such a hard time getting out of fossil fuel, there's another aspect. Since we have been tapping these for like 2 centuries, all our economies have been organized around them. And in economy, we use a concept called the carbon lock-in. It means how much fossil fuels have infused our societies and how much our societies have been built around that, meaning they have now incumbent advantage over other types of energies. And there are 3 aspects to this carbon locking. The first one is existing infrastructure. It's a bit the obvious. Just think about our transportation networks, our transportation means, how cars and planes are working. Also think what we have developed, all the infrastructures we have established to transport forms of energy, all the plants that relies on fossil fuels, coal, etc., that we use, especially in the industry. And in order to get out of fossil fuel, we'll need to also phase out those existing assets, capital assets, and replace them with new infrastructures, plants, capital stock. But another aspect is also everything pertaining to technology and innovation. In a way, we could say that fossil fuel have enjoyed a 2 centuries technological advance over other technologies. And for other technologies to be able to compete against fossil fuel, they need to make up for this for this lag, for this advance fossil fuels have. And it's everything you can imagine. It's all the technical advances that have been made painfully by oil companies, but it's also about school that provides teachings on related to that. It's about all the innovations that have been made around cars, around transportation means, about for example steel making processes. Everything one way or another where innovation, technological development, teachings, know-hows made around fossil fuels It's also about all the technological standards. Right now, you have clear standards around, for example, steel production, cement productions, and one way or another, the existence of those standards for any player in the industry is an advantage. And those standards are based on fossil fuel. And the last aspect on carbon lock-in is usages. And just think about it. If you want to go on holidays on the other side of the world, something that many people like to do, while you need a plane, and today a plane to fly need fossil fuels. And beyond, I mean, beyond the fact that the plane need kerosene, the fact that today it's very normal to go very far away to on holidays once you have a certain budget. And that means that the services that fossil fuels are able to provide are deeply embedded in our very lifestyle. Just think about how much we are used to travel far with a car. An electric car does not go as far as a thermic car. And all the three aspects of the lock-in are self-reinforcing, meaning if we want our industry to get out of it, we'll need to play on all three at the same time. Otherwise, playing only, for example, on the existing capital stock will go to where we will be blocked, will be hampered by the technological advance of fossil fuel and the existing usages, because people will not want them. So it's all about those three aspects. Now, let's explore a bit more what it means to alleviate those three aspects. The first one is technology. Basically, according to the International Energy Agency, we could decarbonize by 2050 in industry by 90%, but the 3/5 of this decarbonation, of this emission abatement, requires technologies that are not fully available yet. When I say not fully available, it means either at prototype stage or at demonstration stage, meaning it's not right now at full commercialization stage. Meaning there will be a massive amount of development required, much more. Here I take the example of France, but I think many of you, if not all of you, are in the UK, but I would assume the UK would be somewhat similar, maybe not. But in a major country like France, the current effort would be clearly insufficient. Beyond that, there is also the issue that since we are talking about bleeding edge technologies, nascent technologies, for an individual company to invest into them is to make a huge bet, because it's one thing to say, I want to phase out heat provided by, let's say, gas, instead I will do it through electrification, but how exactly will it be done? What exactly will be the norms and standard applied? What kind of machines will prevail? If I go for a specific application, maybe it will mean that my company will be locked in this application, while actually in the meantime, other application take up and become the new standard. Meaning it's a big risk for any company to invest in those nascent technology as long as they are not matured. There is no such thing as a no-regret move, or actually the best no-regret move for a company would be more to wait and see, which delays even more the decarbonation, but it also delays the investment, so the infrastructure replacement, so also the technology progress, and so on and so forth. And finally, it will need to be able to tap within skills, within new skills, within people trained to use them, which require effort and teaching. Now, beyond this general framework, now I would like to explore with you 4 technologies that are generally mentioned as potential candidates to phase out fossil fuels. The first one is carbon capture and storage. It's quite easy. You have a plant that emits CO2. You capture the CO2 at the exit from the stacks. You separate the gases, which is the costliest part of the process. And then you send the CO2 through, let's say, through trucks or through dedicated pipelines in order to store them underground or use them in other applications. It seems quite straightforward like that, but it's fairly expensive. The technology itself is still also at demo and proto stage. And deploying all the infrastructure in terms of module to capture sinks to geological sinks and transportation means it could be something like the equivalent of redeveloping an oil and gas industry. Also, another technology would be hydrogen, which is quite a hype right now in the European Union. It has great potential, especially in steel making and chemicals. Problem, you cannot find it in the nature, so you need to produce it. For that, you need massive amount of electric power, low carbon electric power. And electrolyzers, today most of the hydrogen is produced through natural gas, which produce a lot of CO2. But here we need to develop also better develop production through electricity, electrolysis. And right now, this technology is not that mature today, which is one of the reasons we still produce hydrogen with natural gas. Electrification, full electrification is good, especially to provide low and medium temperature heat in replacement of gas, but same, you need to have means to produce low carbon electricity. Finally, everything related to process efficiency, material efficiency, energy efficiency. It's a standard, it's quite a staple. But first, once you have taken the low-hanging fruit, it can become quite expensive. Otherwise, industry do that. We have already done everything it could. And second, you have such a thing called the rebound effect. It means that if you achieve energy efficiency or process efficiency, so the cost per unit decreases, and thus you produce more, meaning the extra production may offset most of the gain you made. Just think about the car industry. All the efficiencies made with engines, and there have been a lot of them, have been used to make heavy cars with more functionalities. So I've not gone in the way into making car less emitting in general. Just to say that those technologies all have potential, but there is no silver bullet to decarbonize the industry. All have the implies trade-off and difficulties. Now, once we have the technologies, it's about to invest. And the amount, again, it's quite massive. According to the international energy agencies, we're talking about $400 billion per year and over the next 30 years. And on top of that, it will go along on a massive investment in other sectors, because we need to decarbonize the whole economy, not only industry, meaning that the decarbonizing investment will represent a quarter of all worldwide investment. And meaning industry would like to invest in this context. Beside the trick for industry, and it's especially true within heavy industry, since it's a highly capitalistic activity, once you invest into new plants, you don't want to replace them every 5 years. And especially heavy industry face long investment cycle. Once you have established a plant, it's there for 40 years or sometimes even more. At best, you have a window opportunity to refurbish it, because every so often, every 2 decades, there are some major refurbishments and overall made. And since those industries, the industrial sector generally is quite competitive and thus suffers low margins, it doesn't have a lot of appetite to make early retirement and extra investment without the right incentives provided by authorities or the context. So meaning we need to be very careful at the windows of opportunity, meaning replacement of assets and refurbishment, in order to make sure that technologies are available and competitive, so that companies use them to decarbonize. Otherwise, we will be locked in for more decades. And it's quite specific of industry. Another issue is also the disbasement. Some assets will end up being stranded. Any hill time investment may end up giving assets that will have to be retired early. And it's quite of an issue because, well, you could easily think about the fossil fuel industry, but today the exact exposure of industrial companies is not very well estimated. The economic literature has made some progress, but it's not comprehensive. And even today, the exact exposure of companies' assets, especially industrial assets, to energy transition is not very well established. Some companies have no real idea where they stand. And the problem is that, let's face it, capitalist economies are very good at investing, at accumulating capital, but disvesting, massive divestment in something we don't really know how to do, and it could really strongly damage and possibility generate companies' failure and damage and weak, fragilize entire swath of the economy. So here is about the investment aspect. It's all about what we need to add, but also what we need to remove. Now, last part, I will go quite fast on that. Changes in usages. With new technologies arrive new ways of using products. It's one thing to develop a more frugal way of creating products, but you have to make sure that your customers will get used to that. And it's also something, it's more on the marketing side, but it also affects industry, either directly for light industry that serve directly customers, or for heavy industry that serve their industrial customers downstream. All right, two brief case studies before I speak too much. The steelmaking industry, very good example of an industry that relies on immature technologies. Today, most steel production is new steel, not recycling, made with blast furnaces that relies on coal. Tomorrow, the sector will go either through more recycling with electric arc, or replacing coal with hydrogen, which is like a prototype at prototype stage, so it will not be there for quite some time, or developing and deploying carbon capture and storage to abate emissions. Many technological options. Again, they are still quite immature. And as you may know, during the late 90s and early 21st centuries, there was a massive push into new steel capacities, especially in China, that have actually resulted in overproduction worldwide in steel at some points. Meaning, right now the industry went through an investment cycle and may not have so much appetite in the short term to reinvest or replace assets. Another one, I will go quite fast, cement, quite a bit different here. It's more the chemical reaction of the clinker, which is the raw material to produce cement, which is then heated with natural gas. And when it reacts with the air, it produces cement and it generates CO2. So how to abate those emissions, either carbon capture and storage for the heating part, replacing as much as possible of the clinker with other material that does not generate CO2. So again, these are new technologies that need to be developed and made competitive. In general, you cannot talk about investing in low carbon for the industry without talking about competitiveness. In a way, without the right incentive, any company will have an interest not to go for the technologies, stay within the fossil fuel based technology, which is more competitive. Otherwise, the industry would have already phased out fossil fuels, and wait for your competitors to take all the risks. Same at the stage of, at the scale of one country. If you introduce mechanism to impose decarbonization, you may end up have swaths of your industry being delocalized in countries that do not apply it. Meaning some incentive will need to be implemented to allow the development of those technologies. In broad strokes, support the initial investment, which are the most risky one, but which were the one that are useful to assess the actual potential of a technology. Then provide the adequate protection to create a level playing field, for example, adjustment mechanism at the border. And once the standards have been established, when the know-how has been established, make sure it's being spread all across the sector. Some mechanism to achieve it. Carbon pricing, it's a darling of economists, but it's not very popular. It's probably the cheapest way to achieve the right behavior from industrial companies. Regulation can be used for sectors where it's too expensive to decarbonize, and the carbon price is not high enough, but it can be a very stiff cost for companies. And more interestingly, we have seen right now central banks that are starting to foray into active climate policies, which may result into more disclosure and actually less capital cost for low carbon projects. So just a few levers that could be applied by public authorities. It's also what the industrial sector need to be careful about. What are the implications of a carbon price? What are the implications of new regulations? This is part of the challenge. And again, I would like also to mention that it's not about what happens in the plant. It's also what happens before and after. Here is the example of a famous multinational cosmetic company. So it's an insurance company because they develop their own product. As you can see, what happened in the plant is only a small stuff. And decarbonizing means also understanding what's happening before, what will your suppliers do, and after, what will your customer do. And in a way, it's also how your own decarbonization affects yourself, but also how the decarbonization of others affect the others. So again, this is what part of the challenge that for industrial companies. So I'm almost at half an hour talking. I talk too much, so I will conclude right in time. A few broad conclusions to keep in mind when it comes to decarbonizing industry. It will take some time. It will be a long endeavor. Industry have long investment times. There is a big effort to put technology at the right level. It's possible to do it, but that's why it needs to start now, and it will be a decade, decades long effort. R&D, I have mentioned that it will be mandatory, especially at the beginning, especially with public support. And ultimately, it's all about whether those technology and in how much time those technology will pick up and become competitive within the time window we have to avoid dangerous climate change. And as long as they won't become competitive enough, they will require some support against fossil fuels. And support generally means that you need one way or another to have coordination among government among the world, especially if this support lasts over time. And we know that international cooperation is in short supply. So it's really about whether a set of technology can pick up, become competitive, and replace all ones across the spectrum in terms of infrastructures and individual usages. And finally, there will be such thing as a massive investment. And when we say massive investment in new technologies, it means one way or another, there will be winners and losers. Entire sectors, also among sectors, some of the entire sector will disappear, some of them will strive. And also within countries, some countries will be able to develop new industrial sectors and competitiveness. Some others may lose into that. All right, that's it for me. I hope it was clear enough, interesting enough, and that it was up to your expectations. Cyril, I think you wanted to continue from that.
Yes, thank you, Guillaume. And actually, it's a good transition because your first point on your last slide on the conclusion was saying how it's going to take time. It could take up until 2050, and it requires massive investments. And I was one thing that I've been working on for my work in the last couple of years is looking at the speed of adoption of new technologies. And I'm just going to show you a fun chart. Let me try and share it, which I've taken from BlackRock. I'll show it to you now. So hopefully you can see the slide here. So what this is showing you is the adoption curve of basically new products, new technologies, looking back to the 1900s. And on the y-axis, you've got the adoption rate. So you go from basically zero when you've got a new technology all the way to close to 100% when everybody's been adopting it. And the one thing that's interesting, I've showed it at the bottom there, how in the early years of the past century, the adoptions would take 20, 30 years. If you look at the length of time you take to go from like 0 to close to 100, and how more recently, with quite a few of the newer products, especially on the digital side, you've basically gone from 0 to 100 very quickly over, say, a 10-year period, roughly. So my question to you is, why would it be different for some technologies? Whether that's it doesn't have to be the whole spectrum that we solve climate change in 10 years. I'm not saying that, right?
Absolutely.
But for electric cars, the change from say generating electricity much more from renewables, which the cost of producing electricity has collapsed by 90% in the last 10 years, and some people expect will continue to collapse in the following 10 years as their adoption increases, production increases. I think that's called Wright's law. So with that in mind, and the fact that governments actually are also pushing hard for that to happen sooner than later, why wouldn't we have actually an adoption of whether that's hydrogen, electric cars, and so forth, much more quickly than 2040, 2050?
Yeah, that's a very good point that you raised, and indeed, as you have shown very clearly how fast it can go, and you have also mentioned a very interesting point is that government support, which can play a big role, especially. But here, I think the main point I would see here that most of the products here are consumer products, basically that need industry to be produced, but it relies a lot on consumer acceptance. And so you have a new fad, something new that happens, people like it, early adopters get it ramps up quickly, and it becomes standard. The second thing I see that in many cases, if I take all this list, I could say that I could find them all in most households, meaning there have been no replacement. On top, it's been more accumulation of new usages of new technologies. Obviously, there would be a few exceptions, but in most cases, have been that. The difference here with industry, especially when we start to talk about heavy industry, it's all about the existing assets. Basically, new technologies will not make steel better. It will just be a new way of producing steel. It will just change what are the byproducts of the steel, in this case, the CO2. But today, if it's all about convenience, we already have very good steel coming from blast furnace. So it's the decarbonation in many aspects in the industry means replacing otherwise very suitable technology with a new one and stop using the previous one. And I think this is where the main issue is. And it all boils down to stranded assets. In a way, if we're ready to assume and to face the cost of stranded assets, it could go much faster. I mean, clearly, I'm quite sure the steel industry, given the right incentive and with massive support, could foreclose existing blast furnace and goes to new ones. And it could go faster, but it's more the amount of cost and the fact that we already have suitable technology in that regard. I think these are the main breaks versus what you're showing.
Yeah, and I think that's a good transition into my next one, which is, if you look at the chart on the left, it basically shows you the kind of blue line is the same S-curve that I was showing on the previous chart, and the red line is price. So, for a lot of industries you've spoken about, a lot of technologies, where do you think we are on that scale? Are we, and just forget the kind of axis and the times here, but just try and think just theoretically, because we're not there in that part of the curve in terms of the adoption, but as you can see, it can happen potentially very quickly when we get through that cost advantage, which is the chart on the right-hand side, but in the interest of time, we don't need to go for that.
Yes, absolutely. And here it's very interesting because it would depend on which technology. And I can see on the right hand that we see solar panels, and solar panels are a very good example. They managed to take up very quickly thanks to massive government support, and so they could ramp up very easy, very fast on this scale. Now, if I were to take the technologies I mentioned, hydrogen, CCS, and are clearly on the lower part, the one that is leftward. I mean, there are massive things to be done to improve it. If you can see carbon capture and storage, right now you basically have a few demonstrators organized by especially oil companies. But what it will mean, there is massive improvement ahead of us. Same for something like hydrogen-based steelmaking. I think you have a few prototypes that are being sponsored everywhere, like in Japan. In Japan, I think they've started to do a 100% hydrogen-based steel making. So it's very, very, very early. Now, what will make this new technology go up to the accelerating part will be the acceleration of the adoption, and it's all about that. In order for companies to invest into that, either they want to invest in it, but right now we already have well-established capacities, or we need some support, and then it could be very fast. But then again, something to keep in mind, since the industry is highly capitalistic, it means that at the onset, a big part of the cost is the capital cost. So meaning once you have a functioning blast furnace, even if you manage to clearly improve the cost structure of an hydrogen-based steel-making plant, well, the existing blast furnace will still be competitive, because once the whole blast furnace has been established, it's just about the price of the coal and the price of the iron, which remain quite small. So it's more when there is a change, when there is a replacement of assets, either because they have been divested early or because they reach their end of life. This is where you have a window of opportunity, and this is where it can go quite fast.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Guillaume. I see that we still don't have any question for now in the Q&A, so I have actually a couple of questions, and thanks a lot for this very good presentation, because it was really interesting and I learned a lot from it. What I wanted to know is, I understand that basically divesting from the fossil fuels is more a fact of compliance and regulations that the governments will need to lead in the next years, than actually this process will bringing incentives and actually competitive advantage. But up to now, do we have like good example of transition from one old carbon fuel source energy to a new modern, less carbonized energy that we can already use as examples, and can maybe talk about success in this transition?
I would have 3 examples in mind. The first one is an old one, is how France phased out its fossil fuel-based electricity production with a massive push with nuclear power. It's an example of energy transition where on a specific sector, only on the electricity sector, previous technology had been phased out. There was some government support, and then it took it back by itself. Another one would be what we're seeing right now in Norway, where there have been a massive push for electric vehicles, thanks to government support, regulation on fuel emission, and meaning right now electric cars are taking up very fast in Norway. And in general, and here I will refer to Cyric's previous chart. Renewables energy are becoming increasingly cheap. Obviously, it doesn't say the whole story, because they are not pilotable, and we need to find ways to store electricity or to make up what happens when there is no wind and so on. But still, it can make massive dents in, let's say, coal electric production, or for example, if you take in Germany, even if it's not perfect, they still have been able to reduce their emissions, because when there is sun and there is wind, it comes from renewables, not from coal. They stop their coal plants and get it from there. So you have examples. You have example on sectors. You don't have such a thing as a full economy that have made its transition, but you have examples.
Okay, so we already, that's good news to know that actually we initiated this transition already.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we are not that late, so maybe we can catch up on the demand. But also another question that I had is what are the most impacted energy, the most impacted companies and maybe organization or sectors are doing actually to deal with this challenge?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the company, obviously, but for the one which are the most affected, let's face it, in a way they are facing it's not a headwind at this level. They are in a dead hand with their economic. Basically, they need to prepare themselves to shed their previous economic model to prepare a new one. If I take an example, which is previously called Total, now Total Energy, thanks to their rebranding. I mean, what it looks like is that they will use the profitability of their oil business to prepare themselves to go toward new activities, which would more be toward electricity, renewable energy, and so on and so forth. In a way, it's a bit like, you know, the good old BCG matrix. They have to use their milk cows, which would be government use, in order to found their new stars. But again, it's good when you are an oil company and you enjoy very comfortable margin. It's a much bigger problem when you are a coal-based company with much lower margin and much more competition from renewables and gas.
Yeah, and I think historically, because that's something that I have to consider when I look at investment. For instance, when you compare like a Tesla, which is starting from zero, to a VW, which is already well established, but having to reinvent itself. Apparently, historically, when you've had big shift like this, the incumbents have never managed that transition, you know, where they have to manage the legacy where the cash flows are falling. At the same time, it's having to invest a lot to effectively stay competitive compared to the new entrants. Bearing in mind some of them, whether that's oil or the VWs of this world, they have a lot of debt. So they've got the pressure on, you know, the amount of interest they've got to pay too, which is quite tricky. So I think the next, I don't know, 10, 15 years will be very interesting, because if that transition happens quickly, I think the incumbents with, you know, all the stranded assets, that's going to be very costly to whoever owns the bonds in these companies or the equities as well. Absolutely. So I think there are going to be issues for some companies, clearly not for all of them, but it's an interesting dynamic that, for instance, I'm watching in my job.
No, but you're absolutely right. And I think the question is who will foot the bill of those stranded assets, whether it will be the taxpayer or the company will be left to their own. And it will also depend on whether governments and communities see whether there are new newcomers that could replace them. And considering the size of those assets and those industries, it would trigger lots of headaches in terms of economic decision. But it will be an interesting time. I would like to mention something about speed also, because I want to point out that 30 years when it comes to an energy transition is actually quite fast historically. Precisely the challenge of carbon transition is that it's surprisingly fast considering what we're talking, which is energy infrastructure. So yes, it can go fast, and it has to go fast, because 3 decades is quite fast when we're considering the sectors we're talking about.
Yeah, because that's the other thing, you know, as you said, the sectors, you know, that's impacting almost everything that's super key to everything we do. It's obviously it's energy, transportation, tourism. It's just like it's everywhere. And I mean, without mentioning a lot of industries that are linked to fossil fuels, which we don't necessarily see, you know, all the plastic stuff, which a lot of people are trying to find solutions for.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right. Okay. From the participants, nobody has a question, because, well, maybe experiencing, because we are just talking between us three, and I was wondering whether it is a problem with us viewing the questions, or
it's a good panel discussion.
Yeah, but maybe we can also give the opportunity to the participant to ask question. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue. So yeah, my next question then would be more what you're going to be working exactly on the next few years.
So precisely, to give you a bit of an extent, I'm a macroeconomist, and macroeconomics mean that you take the full system. You just don't look at one actor. You see how what one actor does cascades on others and so on, and what are the feedback effects on the whole system. What I want to see is precisely to see in which conditions and with which effects industries will engage investment into low carbon technologies, and what will be the effect on an economic point of view, on a full scale economic point of view, on households, on the other sectors, on government finance, which public policies could improve, slow down or accelerate those transition. What Cyril, you mentioned how to accelerate it. That's precisely what I want to look at and explore. And yeah, it's basically, you know, the infrastructure and the know-how and technology aspect of the carbon lock-in that I want to explore with that. Under which condition are they overcome by the industry that would start to direct its investment toward those new technology, and which conditions those technology emerge, and what are the implications for the broad economy as a whole. And for that, I build a model with assumptions, simplifying assumptions, as always in economics, etc., etc.
All right. Okay. Let me check if we still have no question from the panelists. From the participants. Still nothing. So I don't know. Cyril, do you want to have a last question? Because actually we're getting closer to the end.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a question. Maybe it's more of a debate, but you know, you mentioned hydrogen, and you know, there's electricity as well, and with all that's happening now with batteries, and the fact that it seems to me there's a faster, or that electricity for say electric cars and so forth is on a faster adoption curve, obviously it's at the beginning, than hydrogen. So is there a risk for hydrogen that it never benefits sufficiently from that scale advantage, which means that the cost can collapse and then they can become more competitive and be adopted more. So is there a risk that hydrogen is years behind already, and there's not enough electricity to power the one with too much hydrogen? So maybe it will stay niche, as you mentioned, maybe part of the industry, but will never take off. And what's your view?
I think you mentioned a good point, and I think you made the right observation that right now, when you look at mobility, the advantage is on the electric vehicle side, and massive. Right now, we are on our way to make massive improvement into our batteries. But so, which means indeed, hydrogen has a big problem in terms of cost. Is how do you get rid of this platinum into the fuel cells, and how do you develop electrolyzers that work with renewables? Because right now, to produce hydrogen with electricity, you need a steady supply of electricity, which renewables cannot produce. There are prototypes to do that, but they're not ready. And in the meantime, as you say, we could have not a carbon lock-in, but an electricity lock-in on many aspects on our economy, meaning transportations and low and medium industrial heat. And indeed, that means that hydrogen obviously will always have its place within the chemicals industry and the steelmaking industry. I think then what could happen for hydrogen is to have a second life if as electricity starts to become more massive, because it's one thing to have batteries, but you need lots of components, especially you need metals, rare metals, which will be quite problematic to extract, which will be problematic to separate, to recycle them. And this is probably the next challenge when it comes to batteries. We'll develop many new ways to do batteries, but all of them will make pressure on metals. This is where hydrogen can have, on the second stage, like maybe in 2040 or afterwards, start to take over electricity or develop itself next to electricity, because I'm not sure we can electrify the whole car park, the whole worldwide car park. It would require too much rare metal. It would require maybe too much cables, electric cables, to put it, too much pressure on copper. But probably it will miss the first wave in terms of massive usage.
Interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think that's it. We don't have any questions from the participants, so we're right on time.
Perfect.
Thank you, Guillaume. Very interesting.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So yeah, thanks a lot, Guillaume, for this very interesting presentation, and for participating to this. And yeah, if you want to reach out and to know more about the London Club, it's just you can just contact us. You have all the addresses and the necessary links in the different email that was sent before. So yeah.
All right. Perfect. I will do.